This is a tape-recorded interview with R.W. Dick Ekins. This tape is part of the Kirkland Local History Project, and it belongs to the city of Kirkland. The interviewer is Lorraine McConaughey. It's March 1st, 1994. Okay. Well, let me begin by asking you for a brief autobiographical sketch of yourself. Where did you come from?
I grew up in a country near Spokane, Washington. Father, utility employee, came to the University of Washington during World War II before I was drafted. Got my degree along about 1950 and worked for the General Electric Company for 18 years.
What did you take your degree in?
I got a degree in sociology and pre-law.
Mm-hmm.
After I left, Dad broke, I might add. I went to work for the General Electric Company in their consumer products group for 18 years. And had the responsibility of the Seattle market, and in order to stay in the Northwest, I decided to leave and work for 2.5 years as the major appliance buyer for the Wisefields Value Mart chain, which is a 21-store operation for the Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my sort of sideline involvement was with the Masonic Lodge Order in Seattle, holding several offices there. And in 1972 I came to Kirkland and bought the majority interest in a coast-to-coast store.
Now, why did you decide to go into business for yourself?
I made a negative list of things that I didn't want to do. Ended up deciding a hardware operation would be appropriate. And that time there was a major revolution going on in the retail trade, and so there were hardware stores all over the place for sale. And I picked this one because it was close to where we lived, which was in Seattle at the time.
Was this a sort of midlife crisis? I mean,
Sure. I had mine earlier than most folks. But yes, I was looking for something different than a big company, and this was a very small little store that had been around for a good many years. I think it started in 1913 as Kirkland Hardware. And there were 2 and sometimes 3 other total stores, hardware stores in the Kirkland. And then this one established in a new building in 1963 before my arrival, right next to the Albertson store, where we now have our business on Kirkland Avenue, right next to Park Place.
How did you perceive the market here in Kirkland? Did you look around at other hardware stores?
Oh, sure.
In other suburban areas?
One of the things that was interesting when I was at GE, people in Bellevue used to say that they sold more merchandise to Kirkland customers than the Kirkland stores did. And I think that's been true for many years. I think that the local business climate through the years was not promotional, not too ambitious. And when I took over the management of the coast-to-coast store, it was pretty obvious. This small store, rather poor reputation for having stock, and and there wasn't a great deal of prospect in the present location because it was pretty small.
Mm.
So almost immediately I looked for a new location, and this one became available when Albertson moved into a new operation on Rose Hill.
And we should probably point out for the tape where the original location was.
Okay, the original location of Kirkland Hardware has about 3 opinions, but I believe that I'm convinced it was next to the present C-First building on Kirkland Avenue, where their parking lot is. There was also a post office on Lake Street, about where Hector's is now.
Mm.
And so I believe this moved up here, was over on Park Lane for a little while, but basically moved up in 1963.
Okay.
And then I came into the act in 1972. I had 2 partners originally, bought them out, and moved into this location, and had the struggle of developing cash flow economics from the ground up, because we had decided we wanted to have a broad inventory, and we're looking for a way of serving the community that would cause us to grow.
How stiff was the Bellevue competition when you really got into this?
Well, not too bad. Bellevue Square has never really been have anything competitive with what we have. Ours is a supply. But then one by one, additional competitors grew into this marketplace. From Totem Lake, the Ernst organization in the mid-70s, the Fred Meyer store, Pay and Pack, numerous other specialty organizations, tool shops and the like. And finally, about 4 years ago, Home Base, that is behind Dunn Lumber and Fred Meyer, all have come in. They've all captured attention for a short time, but we basically came back by the simple expedient of providing service to a 3-mile or so area of community, and not really trying to expect to be a destination store, just serving our local citizenry. And I think and then of course when Costco came into the act approximately 10 years ago, our business really started growing because it kept a lot of people home. Costco couldn't serve. Their philosophy didn't develop around basic stuff, but more casual flea market type in and out products. And we had the basic source and continued to grow. Advent of Eagle in the recent 6 months has had an effect on us, but I don't expect it to last, because I don't think people are going to drive 5 to 8 miles and go through all the rigmarole to buy a can of paint. Mm-hmm. And I think that the basic use of the hardware store is to sort of merchandise unplanned purchases, and people come in looking for one thing and end up buying a whole bunch of other, no matter where they go. Yeah, they come in. So that's I'm not getting too far afield.
In 1972, when you first came in here, who were you selling to?
Almost all do-it-yourselfers. I'd say 15% commercial and contract.
Hmm.
The rest of it was do-it-yourselfer.
How did you see, well, one thing we should make clear is you were not initially living here when
No.
you bought the store and were commuting across the lake.
Mm-hmm.
How did you see the rest of the business community when you came in '72?
Fairly fragmented, certainly not cohesive. I belonged to a downtown association at that time called Trade and Promotion, branch of the Chamber. Not very successful, probably only 4 or 5 of the merchants advertised in those days. It was hard to put an advertising program together for Dad's Day or anything else. The downtown area has always been rather unflattering toward its components, meaning that there hasn't been any real cohesive effort where everybody's just really hot to go on an idea. That it's made it difficult for government to respond, sort of a counterforce program. And that's been going on for years.
Why can't Kirkland, or why couldn't Kirkland downtown businessmen agree in the 70s? What were the sources of disagreement?
Or 90s? Yeah, they all don't. I think primarily there is an economic factor, is that there are large numbers of those businesses, meaning retailers, that didn't make a very big profit. There's a stress on dollars, and I think they were very small townish in their outlook. For every location downtown right now, there have been 3 or 4 merchants in the past 25 or 30 years in there. So there have been hundreds of retail stores that have attempted and quite often failed because they weren't able to develop together. They didn't want to put the money in like the shopping centers do for unified promotions. And,
was the East Side Journal still available to you as an advertising venue when you first arrived?
Oh yes, it was here until, I'm saying, about the 1980 or so. It was a strong newspaper. Had a fairly good subscription rate. You could run an ad and everybody would see it. As compared to today, when only probably 1 out of 6 homes get Journal American. Seattle Times, maybe 1 out of 5, or 1 out of 4 at the best. So that there is no newspaper medium that has reached everybody. But in those days, that was probably the best return that we could get.
What was the business climate like, or pardon me, what was the political climate like for businessmen in the 70s when you came here in Kirkland?
Well, there was surviving vestiges of an old boy network going on that went on in pretty nearly every town. Nobody else would do it, so the leading businessmen did it. There were on the council at that time, there was a banker and an investor. There was a pharmacist. There was an insurance man and a contractor, all on the city council at the same time. And they were They were doing what they thought was best. Nobody else came along to challenge them, and I think that was sort of the profile of what city councils all over the United States were in small towns, I believe.
The city manager form of government was not brand new when you arrived here, but it was still pretty new. How did that make any difference in Kirkland? That was not a universal. There was no city manager in Redmond, for instance.
There was a merger between the Houghton district and downtown. I think was more important. That gave a bigger piece of pie for the cut to occur. The city manager was selected, and the idea approved by those people who were on the council at the time. And I think, generally speaking, was much there wasn't much opposition to the idea. They got a good guy who had a lot of ability. One of his probably best remembered ploy was to stick $1 in a corner someplace for a rainy day, and he developed tremendous reserves. Money all over the place over the years of his career here, so that Kirkland did in fact become a well-financed government. And there were some other things that were done that were different, that took the small town flavor away from a government, made it professional in its approach. So that by the time I got here, that type of activity, that type of government had become well entrenched. And city manager was highly regarded in all circles, I believe. I think, as I recall, Mr. Locke left in the early 80s, like about 1982 or so. And so he'd been here something like 20 years or 25 years, and was replaced by the current city manager, Terry Ellis.
Now, you had said that you thought that the '67 merger between Houghton and Kirkland was really of greater significance when you arrived than the city manager form of government. And you advanced a reason for that. Were there any hard feelings left? What was the atmosphere like between Houghton and Kirkland when you arrived in '72? It had been a hard-fought campaign. It had been, this is of course all hearsay for you, this is before your time, but it had been shot down 3 times. Were Houghton people active in Kirkland?
I don't think they were famous. They may have been active. I think, for example, Doris Cooper was on the council soon after I arrived. I was not paying much attention to it at that time because I was busy trying to survive. But there were some in the Kiwanis club I belonged to. There were sort of allusions to some of the scraps that went on through the years, but I never saw any of that firsthand. It was I would say that the vestiges of hard-fought swashbuckling type of activity that the Houghton folks got still lingers. There's some of those folks still there, and when I think this last January, when the Lake Washington School District issue came up, those folks came out in mass, and almost you would almost see them beating their breasts and yelling around the place like they used to do in the old days of the Fulton merger. That activist program that may have survived from that, although I think not. I think most of it is just the era that we are going through right now. I think some of those folks are still lending themselves to that idea.
And you're referring to the wish of the school district to expand their headquarters?
Yes.
Okay. 106, I guess it is.
108.
108.
I'm not saying that occurred all the time, but there have been things come along that show a strong spirit among those people that was going on when I first came in. Northwest College has had quite a battle trying to protect their turf. A construction of a nursing home, retirement home, right behind the Houghton Shopping Center had a tough time. The construction of Caroline Point was not without a lot of yelling and about heights and so on.
Well, what is the fundamental issue there? Single-family homes, family values?
Yes, yeah, you said it. Most people want to have those things that are there, but they don't want them nearby. They want them someplace away. And I'm not saying that all of their program is wrong. I just think that maybe there's more of the humans that I've seen in other communities. I think the same thing is with the downtown area. There's more yelling going on than in most jungles.
You mentioned the Kiwanis going back into the 1970s again. And you were a member of the Kiwanis and also a member of the commercial club?
Well, it was called the
Chamber of Commerce.
But there was a downtown association, which was sort of an offshoot of the chamber. Yes, I was president of the Kiwanis Club here in 1977, and I was president of the Chamber of Commerce approximately 1981-82. There's a heavy involvement at that time.
What is the relationship and what are the different goals of Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions, Chamber of Commerce, and any other players of that kind, especially in this early decade, the first decade of your involvement here?
Well, I think there was a forum of expression which you couldn't get in a small town or in some smaller town. You could go have a cup of coffee in the morning with your gang and pretty much solve all the regional problems, or you could talk to people. As the community got bigger, then the forum had to be manufactured, and of course Rotary and Kiwanis and Lions, all of those came out of a more formal way of expression, you selected a group of friends in a sense, or developed a group of friends, and then you tried to do something for the community that made it significant. And you did fundraising, that was the beating of the drums, and then you provided the community with some things that the community couldn't get any other way. Had to do with park benches and garbage cans or whatever else it turned out that you wanted to do that the city wouldn't provide. And there was a lot of hoopla, but nevertheless, in those days, it was a form of expression which you couldn't get any other way. Fundraising was a fundraising time, a lot of fun, talking and working with other folks in your organization. We had community events that were a good opportunity, again, for friends to get together. I remember distinctly when the Shumway Mansion was moved from its old location above the lake on Lake Street, south of the business district, out to its present location in Juanita. The community very nearly took the whole day off to watch, and it was just like the old auctions on the farm, that everybody saw everybody, people they hadn't seen in years, that lived a few blocks from them, but they never got a chance to talk. And I think Kiwanis provided the same forum as house raising or a moving of the Shumway Mansion. It gave people a chance to work with each other.
Did it make you a good old boy to be part of the Kiwanis?
Well, I think so. I think
or a good new boy, I guess.
Whatever. It was easy to get acquainted. You paid your dues in the sense that you did some work in the community, and then you became a leader, selected because of the way you worked. I used to specialize a lot in membership. I would recruit, because I was the people that showed up here first at our store to buy supplies, and I met them and invited them over, and so I had a fairly good activity as a membership chair, and I worked my way around. And then the old Moss Bay days were here, and we used to have our barbecue beef sandwiches. We sold 7 tons of beef on the weekend to the folks, and some of it was silly and some of it was kind of fun. And so I got acquainted fairly well, being in a general store, but also in Kiwanis. We moved over to this community into Houghton, I might add, in 1981 or 2, and that made it a little easier for my wife to become acquainted, and she ended up being involved with Rotary and eventually the First Lady President of the Rotary Club here a couple of years ago.
Why did you decide to move from Wedgwood to Kirkland?
Well, our kids had finished their high school, and we really did like living over here, looking forward to it. It's just a matter of getting an opportunity to do so. There were some other reasons, but that basically is the main reason. And so we found that being over here gave us more time to participate, and we really actively went, involved in the chamber for 2 or 3 years, hiring a new chamber manager, getting the economics of the chamber into focus were pleasurable, and we had the time to do it by the fact that we lived here.
Mm-hmm. Why did you, what was the transition from this kind of activism as a businessman to running for office, to a public life, a more public life?
Carl Zunneman at the Journal American, who's now the business editor, business section, once said that the biggest problem with Kirkland City Council was its hidden agenda. I'd say that still exists, that there was in the feeling of those.
I need to flip this.
Carl hasn't been here in 15 or so years, 17 years, I think maybe. But the thing still exists. I think that we agreed, those of us in the chamber of the early 80s agreed that in just a few short years, the open government that was once, I think we had an open government back through the early years that anybody could participate. Everybody knew what was going on. All of a sudden, that open government became an issue. And I thought that perhaps the business community was the least accessible to what was going on at the city level than most other groups.
What other groups?
Well, besides the business slant retail sector, you have the religious community. You have the education community. You have the club community, the grouped community, and then you have the neighborhood citizens. And that's segmented, of course, even further depending upon where you live. But those people, as we lost communication through our newspaper, as the daily journal came into focus and created its structure, they were less and less able to give attention to the chicanery of City Hall and either Redmond, Kirkland, or anybody else. They would spend a little more time with Bellevue. But they always put the cub reporter here, and a few of them would look under the rug, but most of them didn't because they didn't know how. And I think that basically the government went on its own merry way of doing what it could, mostly out of view.
So, what you would say there was a transformation in the council from when you arrived until the time you were president of the chamber in the early 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and that there were different groups who had a majority voice on the council, those groups coming from the religious, educational, club, and neighborhood constituencies?
Not all of them, but I think basically the reputation that the council developed had to do with its neighborhood activism.
In the early 80s.
In the early 80s it started out.
And the hidden agenda to which Carl referred and to which you refer, what is that? What was that? Okay, let's try to keep back because we're trying to focus on why you decided to run.
I believe that we had a less balanced group of people who knew less about economics in the community, which I thought was one of the more important segments. The economic community was sort of shoved out in the cold, and it was replaced by a group of people who were less balanced in their outlook, who didn't really believe that economic community provided
much other than just a sort of a dairy ranch where you milk the cow every day. But the cow shouldn't be involved in the government. And I think that basically, I recognized that from among the council leaders in the 80s when I'd go up to testify, that they weren't interested in what we had to say, even though we felt that there were some major problems. We were not invited to share in any of the decisions as a Chamber of Commerce particularly, and we were sort of ignored, and not only that, but we couldn't always tell what was going on, because those folks claimed, that group of people claimed, that they were being elected to make decisions, and they were making them, and that was legal, and the only time that you could be involved in reviewing their work was when it came time for election. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's exactly what happened.
What conditions would you have, or when you ran, what was your platform? What did you want to affect?
Well, I haven't got that in my notes because I didn't bring with me anything to do with my election.
Well, when you were wishing to be elected to office, whom did you run against?
It was an open spot.
It was an open spot.
In fact, there was a lady, a community person, who ran against me, but she didn't really have a very strong campaign. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe I won more because there wasn't anybody effective against me than whether because I was a good guy, but that's about it.
And you were living in Houghton?
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when you came on to the council, who was on it? What did it look like? What did it feel like? Now you were on the council. You were part of it.
Well, I was pretty much a minority in that group at the beginning. I replaced Dan Gregg, who was an attorney, and there had been some others, but basically the focus of the council at that time was on city things, spending money for new shops, buying property for parks. They were just hired a new city manager to replace Alan Locke. I did not participate in that decision. They just built a new city hall. First thing that I noticed that when I first got there was they had to wait till everybody went home at night and admit that they forgot to put an air conditioning system in City Hall, and they were going to have to put $350,000 more into putting in an air conditioner, because the architect had told them that they had a natural convection plan that was just wonderful, but it didn't work. So they had to find $350,000, and lo and behold, they found $350,000 and put it in. I think that I don't think a business-oriented people would have missed that. I think that would have not happened. I think that there would have been. I think basically the open government thing that I've alluded to in years later occurred about that time, the lack thereof. I think there was some, the finances were sort of swept under the rug. Nobody saw what was going on. The budget was published, but it was so big that nobody could see what it was. Good example was Finance Committee, legally enabled to be appointed by the council. Was the Finance Committee did not have anybody on it from the City Council who had any background in finance. And they never published an agenda, and they never published their findings. But the city management, the city administration was able to develop a consensus with those three, and if they got approval from those three, they knew they could find one more vote, so they never published any of their findings. I thought that was close to what Mr. Thurman was referring to in terms of a hidden agenda. You never were able to see how the money was going to get spent. And I think that was where probably I had registered my first real protest, is that was never brought out in the open.
What were the dynamics like on the council? I mean, for many people listening to this tape or studying this tape 30 years from now, what was it like to be a member of the council? Was there free and open discussion? Was the agenda openly arrived at? Were you able to make your concerns known effectively?
The answer effectively is no. The people were not interested, and still are not interested, in the machinations of all of that goes on. Once in a while you throw a warm fuzzy out and say, how'd you like to vote on this bond issue? And it's almost always something for public safety, something for parks. Never an issue of the bond issue for a city hall would never be presented, because the administration said, well, people would always vote against that. So they never really was, that was, and maybe that's what smart politics is. We never got a chance to vote on the Longworth building in Washington, D.C., or I think those things occurred. But beyond that, never got a chance to even know that was it was going to happen until it was announced that the sort of after the fact.
And you found this to be true when you were on the council as well?
Oh, yes. I found that study sessions were merely an announcement of programs that had already been cut and dried, and they were not really, I don't feel that they were really given a chance to, for anybody to say, well, a real study needs to be made. Wasn't very often that it was done. That was almost a formality.
Well, if it was a rubber stamp council, where were these plans being formulated that you were rubber stamping?
I always felt that the council's lack of balance provided them, the city management, city administration, with an opportunity to put the council in its pocket. And that's what I think happens, is that you had a lack of balance. And I think through Mr. Locke's program and his last few years, and with the Terry Ellis's administration, that the council basically became a rubber stamp organization, because they didn't have the expertise to understand the intricacies, or they didn't want to throw it open for an inspection of those intricacies. And I went along the way I did because I'd hoped to see some balance occur. I would say that the biggest frustration was that competent people didn't want to run anymore, and you never saw president of U.S. Steel or anybody in the Kirkland ever wanting to be involved in what was going on. So we ended up mostly, I think, with people who didn't have anything to do, ran for council. They had the finance able to survive without working, or they were wives, or they were people who were involved in government, or they were working for Boeing, who allowed their employees to be involved in government. There were a score or so of instances in the Puget area where Boeing employees have gotten involved in government, run for office. But I don't think you got the balance on the council at all.
with exception of we had an attorney on, Randy Barton, at the time, who was pretty knowledgeable and a pretty well balanced person. But my view is that that's where the community suffered, is that its council didn't have the imagination to provide the balances and the policy making that the city administration needed.
Administration, you're talking about staff, are you not?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So,
City administration would be the entire hired section of our government.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how did this work out in practice? Did you find yourself asking tough questions of staff? Did you find yourself making statements to your fellow council members? What was it like? Being in disagreement.
It basically came down to I think that the council all knew how the vote would go before the subject was brought up. There are very few surprises. Occasionally, there'd be a swing, but basically you knew who was going to vote one way and who was going to vote the other. You didn't have to call each other on the telephone. And but quite often, I think the most exotic situation had to do with the construction of the City Hall. This new addition that's come up was patiently engendered, nurtured, fertilized over a period of time. They didn't do publicly related things like environmental impact. They didn't have a public hearing. They just one step at a time went ahead with their plans to spend $8 million for City Hall without involving the public. Now I think that we needed the City Hall, and I said so. But I said, well, how are you going to justify going around to people like that? And I never really got an answer. They said, well, we were elected to make those decisions. And so I guess that the review is at the next election for those folks. If there's anybody who objects, they'll vote against them. I guess that's the way they felt that their mode of operation would be involved, is that they were elected because they were good folks, and I'm certain that they were. There wasn't a dishonest and city council person that I was aware of. I just thought that they were quite naive, and that they didn't want to get involved in the machinery of public inspection. So they took the shortcut, and of course the city staff was delighted. They got everybody going along with it.
Well, what about an example of a project that had a very high public profile, Caroline Point?
Mm-hmm.
When you moved to Kirkland, what was on the site of the old Lake Washington shipyard? What did it look like? Well,
I was down there and looked at the croquet court, and it was an incongruous situation. A world-class croquet club occupied the loft building, which was the long building that sort of obstructed your view of the grounds. And then there was over here in another location piles of rubbish and an old dock out there with a sunken, I think it was San Mateo ferry boat, was laying on the sort of a mess. And we knew that the Skinners had owned that the prior years, that they'd actually applied for a permit some years prior to construct a high-rise apartment or something there. So then they announced their new program, and basically they owned the side of the hill behind it. The biggest furor was over the height, that I had understood that they were going to allow
a higher rise, 6 or 8 stories, in order to reduce the footprint. So there'd be better view, would be more open space. And I'm not just exactly sure what happened. There was all supposed to be public parking, like 50 stalls for people who would be able to go out and use the public dock anytime they wanted to. And I don't know what happened because there is no public parking. You get a free half hour if you park underneath by the Woodmark Hotel. That we have this cluster of buildings all over. You still can't see the lake, which was what everybody was yelling about. They wanted to be able to see the lake. And so I think it looked to me to this day like a building that was designed by a committee of people who were not architects. Mm. It was a compromise. There are 4, 5, or 6 structures that are all low silhouette, and they don't seem to have. There is not an architectural splendor, in spite of the fact that it's a very popular spot. The minute that the marina opened, they had a groundswell of people occupying it with their boats. It's a marvelous place to walk. Lots of flowers, and so on. The impact on Lake Washington Boulevard, I think, is nowhere near as bad as Bellevue Square's impact. And Bellevue never paid any money to Kirkland for the street beautification or improvement for Bellevue Square, but Kirkland paid Bellevue in mitigating money for Caroline Point. Mm. I think that there's a little bit of irony involved in the idea, and it's become very popular. But I think that there was some fear among the city's leaders that they would just have bumper-to-bumper traffic there all the time. Well, there is some of the time, but it's not because of Caroline Point. If you measure just the cars coming and going from that one street, well, there really is not any major traffic. And I think they were required to mitigate traffic signals all the way into downtown Kirkland, if I'm not mistaken, when they're built.
Now that particular project was 9 months of public meetings, I think.
Yeah,
very high profile.
Yeah. Almost hysteria in the Houghton community over construction of what could have been even better if there would have been just a little more imagination involved. But I remember that the city council spent hours worrying about the view, and I think then with their own incompetence they created an obstruction. Mm-hmm. You can't see the lake from Lake Washington Boulevard very much there. They could have done something more, and you certainly weren't obstructing the view from anybody else, because the back part of the hill across the street is all owned by the people, and they have apartments that they're still operating, as far as I know.
Well, if the lake is an amenity, and perhaps that's something to debate, then public parks along the lake, if Caroline Point is not a public space.
But it is.
Well, it seems to me
that
it
very
is.
much it is.
But public parks along the lake have been very expensive, and will continue to be, and nothing will change that. What about your position on acquisition of land along the lake shore?
Well, I don't think that there's any of the parks that I don't think I get into any. As a Kirkland citizen, I don't occupy a space on any of the other parks, maybe about once a year. I've gone to a tree planting ceremony a few times, and I've walked along the lake a number of times, along the sidewalk. There are 2 or 3 issues that I think are wrong, and that is that I don't think that providing park space along the lake as an amenity should have a view of people who don't live in town. I don't think that we are obligated to provide Houghton Park space for all of Bellevue's kids in Redmond to come to, and who may in fact be the instigators of traffic problems along there. I'm not sure that I'm a creative person enough. I don't believe that. I think there's an issue in whether or not owners of that property should provide pathways for people to, and I say use the word advisedly for the weirdos, to walk along at night, which is what happens. And without any security, those people feel threatened who own those pieces of property, and they're homeowners. So all of the bad things that occur have occurred with the citizens paying the bill. I'm not sure but what a different development other than just open space parks might be appropriate, rather than like the additional money that was spent for the waterfront purchase in
what
a couple
kind
years
of,
ago.
What are you suggesting? What kind of
Well,
waterfront?
I think that the public, first of all, should be allowed to decide whether that property should be bought. In the case of the Brinks Park, the public decided no twice, and the council went ahead and bought it. Now they haven't so far. There hasn't been a furor, but I think it's likely that there will be at some point. Should there be a strong opponent come along to one of those council members, I think that then there will be a forum and some decisions made for those folks who overrode the public expression. It doesn't happen very often that you find a situation where the public is offered a vote on acquisition of a piece of property, and then the council overriding the public. Mm-hmm. It'd be interesting to see how that's spelled out in history. I think that the certain acquisition. I personally feel that we have enough property on the lake. That all we're getting from that is a heavy expense for people who are not much. I think there's enough property for the local citizens to enjoy themselves. And I think we are providing them an opportunity for a future purchase, just like the last one, is that we're taking money off the tax rolls, quite a bit of money, and without providing any real comfort to the citizens themselves. Aside from being able to drive along and say, isn't that a wonderful lake? Nobody really uses the lake. There are not very many people from Kirkland swim in the lake, certainly. You wouldn't take your kids down there to go swimming on the lake with all those ducks around there. I don't believe. Not very many people do. So maybe there's some other answers. I don't think we've given enough imagination to our waterfront. We had an opportunity to put a jetty out in front, one of the Lake Washington bridges. That would have provided an inner harbor, could have been embellished with parks and access and so on. The council didn't even offer the public an opportunity to vote on it. They rejected it. And I'm not sure at this point of time that the public would have rejected that had there been an imaginative use for that jetty.
It sounds like you would like to see a great many more issues put out as referenda in Kirkland.
Yeah, not necessarily as a bond issue,
or even on the vote, I think there should be, I think that an advocacy role, the city should go out and find out what the people think about a subject, and instead of hiding it. You know, the City Hall construction and remodel is ongoing. They're spending a tremendous amount of money, but they've hidden some more money, hidden some more expenditures from public view. They're going to spend $900,000, according to their budget. They plan to spend $900,000 in the new City Hall for fiber optics installation, but that's not part of the original expenditure. I don't think that type of tactic is honest. I think that's hiding from the people. And I think the city hall and the waterfront purchase, and I think even like the Juanita Bay Park that was purchased, the old golf course, they had a $300,000 cost overrun. And that was never presented to the public. These things are hidden, and I think that's wrong. I think you have to. I think the problem is that we have had amateurish media coverage. It's always the youngest person on the staff that's sent to Kirkland, and Kirkland's staff is extremely professional. They know how to play the game, so that the folks over here really don't find out these things. I think that's the whole issue of open government. That's my banner that we're really lacking in, and I do not have the articulation or the time to get in and go to a meeting every day and.
Well, let's return to some specific issues, and maybe let's start downtown and move outward. What are your concerns, and what have they been over the recent decade about the business climate in downtown Kirkland and the infrastructure that exists here, or the lack of it, to foster a solid business climate?
Well, I think that there is a plan, again, a hidden agenda, having to do with not just downtown, but the rest of the business community. Just as a quick footnote, I think that the council late last year, the last council of the old guard, selected a sort of a neuterized any type of development for the Juanita area, because they became so concerned with pedestrian ways and view corridors and design reviews that they have neglected to consider what would be good for the people who lived out there. And that if they were going to be, and I think this is called moratorium politics, because I think what happens is that the selected restraints put upon the Juanita area, similar to downtown, have caused the development to be retarded, and if it is, it will not be everlasting. I think that in the downtown area we have the same problem. There is a moratorium politics plan to be concerned entirely with views. I think it's interesting that the publisher of the East Side Weekly took the Kirkland to task for its lack of initiative and imagination in the downtown area. I don't believe that view is the most important concern, or design. I think the biggest design obstacle for the downtown area has to do with how to attract pedestrians. Pedestrians have to come by car. There isn't any other way to get downtown. Nobody is going to put a suit and tie on or high heels and ride a bus for dinner in the downtown area. When I say nobody, very few. I think you have to provide a place, a parking place certain for people to come to, and a way to make the downtown a pedestrian type of environment, which includes the art community. As we develop a performing arts center here, the framing and the various art galleries and the eateries that are down here have already sort of cut for the next decade or so, or longer, what the downtown's going to be used for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be a destination for people who don't live here. You can call it tourism if you want to, but mainly people from other cities nearby. They have some navigation, people coming in tour boats.
But an entertainment destination.
But an entertainment destination. And because of this, it has to be attractive and clean. I think the city staff, the city administration, and basically the policy of the council of the last decade has been an obstacle to this more than say, accoutrement. And I think that until this happens, until a realistic council comes along, it's always going to languish. That you can't beat the drums and say this wonderful library is going to solve all of our parking problems. Everything's wonderful, because I think you have to have more than that. You have to have good sidewalks. There's some sidewalks only 4 or 5 feet wide downtown, accommodating hundreds of people a day. And they're putting in parks down there, but they're not doing anything for the pedestrian in the center of town. Not as many people go to parks along the waterfront as go to either Caroline Point or downtown. And you need, if you're going to be a good planner, you need to have a plan. Some things could be done.
Do you mentally integrate Park Place with downtown?
Yes, I think it has to be. May not be right now. I think you have to have storm covers for people to walk in places. You have places for bicycles to be parked and bicycles to go. You have to have friendly, just a whole set of friendly circumstance. You have to have garbage cans picked up instead of left overflowing on a weekend. You have to have all these things. You have to have lighting. You have to have trees. You can't even plug in a Christmas tree light in downtown Kirkland because there isn't any place to plug them in.
Mm.
And the street lights are way up in the air for freeways instead of down, and all this. And there are some plans to change all this, but they're slow. And the administration has fish to fry that don't include this. Have the same problem in Totem Lake, is that one of the things I heard expressed when I was in the council, that Totem Lake should be the business center, and you dumped all your density into Totem Lake as a solution to keeping single families in other parts. I don't think you can do this. I think you have to have a balance all over town.
Well, is the implication there then that when people talk about the small town feel of downtown Kirkland and want to keep heights low and want to keep historic buildings, they're trying to create a sort of museum village which is a very artificial business environment?
You said it. I think that basically that height and the patent look of is not what I'm talking about. The environment of a downtown area is got to be considered first, and height is only a part of that. The footprint of whatever's there. Now, it's very unlikely that anything will happen to the funky center part of that area. I mean, those old buildings will probably stay there forever, because it's this sort of, they say, charming. But there are some other parts of the side of the hill and so on that could become part of that. And again, height, I'm not talking about having to go high. I'm saying that that's not the basic problem. Height is not the problem. It's the location, amenities, the infrastructure. That's the problem, and that city council of the past decade or so has not come to grips with that. They're not willing to talk about it.
Where does the KDA, where does the Kirkland Downtown Association fit into this picture?
Not very well at this time. They don't have an economic base to do the things that they need to do. They can't take on, they can try, but they don't have a very strong following from among the businesses. There are a whole lot of businesses that don't belong to them. Almost the entire Park Place doesn't belong to the KDA. It has its own association, and they're concerned with their internal promotion. Those people are not concerned whether there's a restaurant in the downtown or not. They're concerned, and I don't think that's right. I think it has to be a cohesive overall plan.
Well, what is the relationship between the KDA and the Chamber of Commerce in your perspective?
Strained, and neither one of them are doing, I don't think, an excellent job. I think there's an issue. The Chamber of Commerce is an issue, and I may be the sole survivor of the old day of, it's not confrontation, but at least taking a stand on an issue. And I think the same thing with the KDA that's skirted around with parking, and the city has avoided committing to a direction. And on the other hand, KDA has done some remarkably good things on small dollars. They've got some plantings going, and they've gotten some of the street at least better cleaned from time to time. But I don't think their economics are very good as of this date. I think they have a problem in getting membership. It's voluntary. When they had it as a tax program some years back, there was just all kinds of hullabaloo from those people who didn't want to pay. But that money was needed. There needed to be some money. Now, I'm not sure that they used the money wisely that they had, but there needed to be some money. Of course, government hardly ever measures up as an economic force saving money. Government spends the money and sometimes wastes it. But the KDA has had the same problem, but it doesn't have a wide membership. They've had a conflict with the chamber over turf from time to time. I'm not sure there should be two organizations for this small an area. I'm not sure that there shouldn't be one and have an office working out of the chamber, so you share facilities, so you're a little more economic. I think the present director of KDA is sensational in terms of getting the bang for the buck on the money that's spent. That's Ann Anderson. And I think that the move last fall for the chamber dismissed the guy I hired, Steve Gowing, when I was president, looking for a new direction. I think that there were times in the past decade when the chamber failed to participate in some of the issues. They never took a stand on the Lake Washington School District expansion on 108th. They didn't take a stand on the construction of the City Hall. They took a stand on the waterfront purchase, but they didn't take a stand on 124th Northeast, which was a major issue. We'll get to that in a minute. So that there is not the strength that I think that is needed in the business community, and I think maybe that's why there are not that many people on the city council from the business world. I think it's just a sign of the times.
Well, I think this is just my own opinion, and perhaps I shouldn't express it, but it seems to me, I would suggest for your own comment, that the business community is a divided constituency.
Certainly.
It cannot elect or select one representative or two because it itself is divided about
Yep.
its own point of
Yep.
view.
And the people who live up on the hill don't take kindly to sharing viewpoint or sharing operation of things having to do with economics and have it here in this town. And so I may have self-destructed on that basis, that I couldn't get other people to join and be involved in the council activity. It's awful hard to listen to all that stuff that comes out of there and still hold on a job during the day.
You mean you couldn't recruit
I couldn't
other
recruit
businesses
other businesses.
to run?
There's one now that sort of replaced me, that Larry from the wine shop, who just started, Larry Springer. So that all this is tied together is that probably if the chamber, economic world, had taken a stand, I don't think you have to beat on anybody's head if you're a chamber director, but you have to call attention to what you think are failures in a nice and diplomatic way as possible, but you still have to represent a point of view. 124th Northeast was a really good issue.
Let's talk about that.
That's the only corridor of communication between the north and south ends of the city, east of the freeway. The rest are geographically represented, and on the west, Juanita, 100th and the road up Market to Juanita are really serving a different part of the community and are used a lot. 124th Northeast, if it were provided, would be used a lot. Northeast 70th, if it had been provided wide enough, would have been used a lot. But the neighborhoods didn't want that use.
Well, 70th was widened to 4 lanes.
No, just 2 as a center lane.
And turning lane.
Yeah. Now, there was some compromise tried. I tried to get the state board to let us have 5 years or so of 2 lanes on 124th to see how it worked out, because one of the things that was bothering the people is that 405 was itself glutted with cars and didn't have any HOV lane, and 124th was narrow, and so the people were crawling through the neighborhoods to find some way to get from their home to where they had to go. And the theory behind freeways, that a freeway should really be used for more than a 5-mile trip.
Mm-hmm.
Anything under 5 miles should be siphoned off to other streets. Well, neighborhood involvement, and one case that basically we developed was the people who lived on 124th wanted the street widened. People who lived off from it but near it didn't want it widened, and there were more of those. So they apparently convinced the majority on the council to cash it in. I think the chamber should have been involved in that. I think what happened is that a small neighborhood was given veto power, whereas the arterial was really a city involvement. I think that the direction of thought, credibility should have been given to the overall good of the city rather than just to a neighborhood group. And I don't mean that they didn't have rights, but I think there could have been
some development. Like Northeast 70th is really not a bad-looking street. And if you ignore the speed limit, which is I think 30 now, and go about 35 to 42, which is about what everybody does, it's probably a pretty good street. I think that the 124th could serve a lot of people. In addition, they're putting a fire station out there, which needs to move at a much more than 25 or 30 miles an hour. And I think there's some question in my mind of how well that fire station is going to cover downtown, for example, as sort of a backup with all the traffic that there is on there.
Well, you've characterized council hesitancy, council naivete, council amateurishness. Is this an unwillingness to make a tough decision, an unwillingness to make an unpopular decision and take the heat? Why is the council so timid then to take positions that evidently, when you were on the council, you argued articulately?
No, I don't think I
and
did.
vehemently.
I probably did vehemently, but I don't think that, I don't think that I was a persuasive force. I was just a guy in the business community who was looking, maybe that there was a feeling among those neighborhood activists that to be ignored. That you're more comfortable of a decision if it favors the neighborhood groups if you're from the neighborhood. Whereas if I would have voted for 124th Northeast as a businessman, I'd have gotten flack from a whole bunch of people.
Mm-hmm. Although ultimately every Kirkland council person is from a neighborhood.
Yes, but I'm more accessible during the daytime than they are. They were at the university, they were in their homes, they were at teas
I
and
don't
so
mean
on.
that. All I mean to say is that the dynamics of neighborhood constituency affect every council member, yourself included. You live in a neighborhood. It can be adversely impacted by decisions as well as along 124.
But I don't think that my decisions were based on just the neighborhood. I felt that my decisions were based on what I thought was appropriate for the entire city rather than just a local. And I think that the majority of the decisions of the last decade have been made to appeal to the people whose interest is just neighborhood.
Do you think 124th is a settled issue at this
No.
point?
Because what's happened is the city has taken the same amount of money that they would have had to match, and they've gone out and widened the intersections in three or four places that there are. And I noticed they widened the shoulders. It's sort of, if you called it whoring around, I think that's what you'd call it with 124th. It is little by little getting widened, and that they have to, because the fire department, which calls heavy shots, the public safety call heavy shots in the city hall, that if you had a big $500,000 truck or a small $200,000 medic van out in the middle of the country, and you were trying to run a good railroad, you'd get the place widened somewhere or other so that if they had to, they'd get by the traffic. And if you can imagine 124th Northeast without heavy traffic, let's say at 5:30 in the afternoon, of a summer day, somebody has a heart attack at Costco, and you imagine being able to get through there, through those, to just a real fast trip.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think they're going to have to, until they blew out the shoulders and so on.
Yeah.
And so the compromise was made. It's just that doesn't make any difference to me whether there's just one car in front of my house sitting there for several hours spewing out carbon monoxide Okay, if he's sitting there, he's spewing carbon monoxide. If there are 500 going by, all spewing, that seems to me that we have a problem in the realism of what is dangerous and art. It seems to me moving traffic through to their homes makes your citizenry happier.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, Doris Cooper has remarked in her interview that one of the hardest things for transitioning from being an activist on behalf of whatever constituency it is that an individual represents, making the transition from activism to being willing to make hard decisions and take shots for it,
yeah,
that's the hardest transition
I
to
agree.
make.
That is.
Because it's moving to being a leader, and it is a kind of professionalism in politics that I think does not come easily.
And I don't think that we have the reputation of being a council that is willing to take the hard shots. I think they're taking the comfortable shots and going home and being with their friends and being soothed, rather than going home and say, I voted against this because, and I'm willing to take it. And I've taken it. I've also had thousands of comments from people here in the store where I've been working. What was one? It had to do with the KDA, the Downtown Association, when it was first became a governmental unit. I took a lot of shots on that. I still believe that it should have continued. I think that they should have found a way. I think the city should have primed the pump a little bit, because now the city has to take on, as the KDA becomes weaker, the city's going to have to take on some of those things. I'm talking about plantings and sweepings and hauling of garbage and so on. Anyway, it sure takes a lot. I think that there have been some. You asked me one time if I would be prepared to tell you what some of my mistakes are and failures. I think one of them was the Overlake Christian Church. I worked behind the scenes as much as I could to try to find a way to let the status quo continue. No major rebuilding, but we had some problems to solve at Overlake Christian Church. One of them was traffic. One of them was the obstinacy of the administration at Overlake Christian Church. They ignored the neighbors. It's like an elephant in an anthill. People would call and complain, and they didn't follow. They just flicked them off. Those, particularly the people who lived on the northwest corner of that property, who were being violated at 6 o'clock in the morning with noisy buses. There could have been some solutions. There could have been a widening, and they were willing to widen 132nd out toward 85th, so that on Sunday the traffic would be able to whip out, instead of having a policeman uniform standing holding up the traffic, or not allowing the people to back out of their driveways that lived on 132nd. There's many little things that made those people furious on the one hand, but I think it could have been some things, and I don't think I worked hard enough. I think I should have worked harder. Randy Barton was on the council at the time, and I really, I don't think those people, I think there's maybe some feeling that those those folks in that church were evil or in some circles.
Wait, Randy Barton is from the Seventh-day Adventist College. When you say there's
Randy
some
and I,
feeling in some circles that the people from that church were evil. Which church?
well,
No,
overly Christian, and that they were so dogmatic that they stepped on people to get where they wanted to go. This is a figure of speech, you understand, but that we really didn't, the city did not work very well with them, and I think that maybe they were going to, they didn't know what they were going to do. I guess they're planning to build in Redmond, but they're going to have the same problem out there. Then what are we going to do with this facility? Are they going to, they're certainly not going to donate it to the city of Kirkland now. Maybe it's too small for a junior college. Maybe there should have been some planning done, and I don't think that city administration or the council really looked at the consequences of what you had to do, and you had, maybe there's some things that we could have sat down and worked out. We never got a chance to do that. It was always done on a sort of perfunctory basis, and that's where I think I went and I've talked to some of those people, and they have the good issue is that Overlake did ignore its neighbors, and Overlake shouldn't have avoided its neighbors, and they could have still been there. I guess that's history, but it's a good example of some things that I think that the city could have done a better job. I think the city of Kirkland has been sort of I guess you'd call it hostile is not really the word, but toward other jurisdictions. Seems like we put them through a gamut if they want to build. We're talking about the Evergreen Hospital has had all kinds of problems trying to get their processes done. Northwest College has had problems. City of Kirkland's relationship with the school district has just been abysmal over the years. So we have some things we could do together: build swimming pools, other shared facilities. We haven't done any of that. They didn't write a letter to the Department of Transportation for 5 years that I know of in the development of HOV lanes through our town. In the meantime, they spent a lot of money on Bellevue. We needed just as bad, and the radio stations laughed about the Kirkland crawl. We needed to have traffic on 405 mitigated in some form. And we never tried. All those years went by and nobody ever called the DOT or have been stronger and should have taken stands on this. Chamber takes credit for some of the work done on 124th Northeast. It seems to me that we have, as a city, been involved in our own little world, but we haven't had the imagination to develop a good relationship with other jurisdictions. I think we need to do that. Okay?
Okay.
One area I have reason to believe that some of the surveys that the city has taken, I think there were 2 when I was council, were fairy tales. I think they went out and told a survey consultant what they wanted in terms of public comment, and I showed some of their the questions that they ask are less than satisfactory. And a good example with this is that the city administration told the council that the people really wanted parks. And so the city went out and bought millions of dollars worth of property and spent millions of dollars in development of parks. But I don't think they asked the people the right questions. I'm not sure what kind of parks they wanted. I question what the people have to think. I have evidence to believe from people I've talked to that there hasn't been a clear-cut public opinion taken. Okay? Mm-hmm. And that there have been some decisions made. All of the new little park up on 108th that's just opening soon. The relationship with the school district headquarters was a 5-acre park. Just how much park do people want? And I'm not sure that the city really thoroughly surveyed the issue, or is there any kind of a question on expenditure. And what the parks are to be used for. For example, do you buy property for 20 little neighborhood parks with slides for kids? Or do you just put money in on a waterfront purchase and tear down a clinic? I don't think I don't think it's been decided. Are you going to use parks for alternate recreation? For example, lighted basketball courts for adults? Or do you want open space? I think that decision has been made introspectively at the administration level. I don't think it's been given the due consideration by the public itself, and we spent a lot of money to do all those things. That's my question having to do with park development. I think of course we have to have parks, and I think we have to develop them as we go along. I think we have to get a public policy going on that. Okay?
Okay. Well, new parks lead one to think about annexations. And what about annexations? There were considerable annexations during your tenure on the council. What was your position on those?
Well, I think we have to. I think that I think the county's administration of unincorporated territory has been, in some areas, pretty lacking. Public safety and probably streets. I think the city should pursue a policy of annexation as much as possible. I suspect that the recent decision by the council at the retreat to go easy on annexation of Kingsgate is maybe more political than realistic. I think that they look at the votes out there as maybe detracting from the overall direction of the city's going. I don't believe that the city hall that they're building now is going to be too small, or the payroll too small to handle all the things that Kingsgate has to offer. I think they could annex North Juanita and a portion of Rose Hill, which includes Holmes Point and Denny Park, without adding one more person, with possible exception of police. They have all the fire coverage already out there, already built in. they have certainly don't lack for employees in terms of getting done and equipment. I think they have all the equipment they need. I think that they say they had to work so hard because of North and South Rose Hill annexation. I don't believe the city staff has had that much pressure. I just think it's a matter of personal prerogative. I'm not sure that I'm in any hurry. I think the people out there want to unitize their annexation and go one way altogether. And the Boundary Review Board has given a piece to Woodinville and a piece to Bothell, but that isn't what the people out there want. And it may be that they will have to that they will have to incorporate, for a while, get by.
Like Houghton.
Sort of like Houghton, or like what's the area up at beyond Newport Hills? It's just I think it is Newport Hills. It's just incorporated. I think the people, if they want to stay together, should stay together. Maybe they're going to have a little fight on their hands to establish that, but I think they should be treated as a community and not as an artificial piece of pie that needs to be cut up. Okay?
Okay. You asked me to remind you about Dwayne Lund.
Well, I think that this unfortunate tragedy that occurs with Dwayne Lund occurred right in the middle of a departure that the chamber officers are taking. I had some pretty strong reservations at the time. I asked the chamber for a position on some of these things.
You're just going to have to be a little more specific.
Okay. All right.
For the sake of
history.
Understanding.
Okay. Dwayne was president of the chamber in 1993 when some of the issues, one of which was the construction of the city hall. Another one was a waterfront park issue. Third one was the Lake Washington School District expansion. And he and apparently his board differed with Keith Gowing's direction. And the result was that the chamber didn't take an issue. And I asked them if they would take an issue, and they said no, they didn't want to take a stand on any of those things. And after Keith Gowing's departure, they said that they were taking a new direction, and they were going to try to be more engaging as far as the city administration was concerned, that they were going to try to become involved in a friendship with the city. And in the middle of this, then of course Dwayne died before they have appointed a new chamber manager. So I don't know what the results are. But the reason for bringing it up is that I think the chamber does not have to be a redneck shouting body of animosities toward the government. I think the city needs to have the business community's input. And I think there's some things in terms of economics that the chamber could be a big help to the city in its program. Right now, I don't see anything, any direction that is going to be very wholesome, and I don't predict great advances by the chamber with the tactic that they're employing.
So you're implying that that although the chamber need not be in contention with the city, the chamber cannot be in a friendship with the city.
That's true. Friendship might not be the right word, but it's a correlative. Is that the good friends do not always agree on all issues.
Mm-hmm. Along with inquiring what you felt had not been a success in the past, I guess I'd ask, what are you proudest of about your tenure on the council?
I think I got a popular response from people having to do with my open government stance. The last year I was in office, I felt that there were some things that needed to be expressed out loud. I was outvoted, but the people seemed to be watching what I was saying. Just before you arrived this morning, a lady at the senior center said, "Oh, you should still be there. We need you. Okay? You're the only voice we have." I feel that there is a strong, I'd say in the World War II people are very strongly in favor of what I come out against. The older group of citizens in town, a lot of people who shop here. I've had a great deal of comment the last year as I've had some differences of opinion with the majority, and it's come out in the paper. There's a very strong feeling left that we need to stand up and tell government, those of us who are elected, and set policy. We need to set policies to control government's phlegmatic approach. Okay?
And you're proud of your role in doing that.
I'm proud of that.
As you look toward retirement now, what will your political involvement be in Kirkland?
Probably not much. There's an empty feeling that we get the last day of school. Mm. We're glad on one hand and we're empty in another. I think I have that feeling. I'm trying to find other involvements. I think I'm doing pretty well. I still have an economic slot to fill here to establish my son as the operator, and my wife and I are doing some of the things that last were free that we're able to. We're planning for several years, travel and otherwise. So I have no plans to be involved in government again. I enjoyed it very much. It was masochistic, is that the word? I got beaten up pretty badly several times, either because of what I did wrong or said, or because I stuck with an issue. I think that there is I expect that another council, a different time will come about that will take a look at the overall, the need to come to grips with growth problems. Totem life is a huge thing ahead of us. Population is another. Transportation is another. I don't think the course we're setting now that the city is able to cope with those.
Well, that is my question. As these issues grow more demanding, and as the consequences grow more severe for making mistakes, what is the recourse for a non-professional council? Where will the people come from who can devote full professional time in the way that you suggest the council needed to have done to these issues, to study sessions and so forth?
I don't have a total answer, except that when they started paying the legislators in Olympia, the quality didn't improve at all. They're spending more time. I think people who didn't have good jobs elsewhere ran for legislator just like they do now for city council. So apparently it isn't the money, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, but it is certainly not. It is certainly not possible to say what it will take to change, that the government will start looking to the public for direction rather than trying to go off on its own. And I don't know what that answer is. It's the same thing, I think, in federal level as it is in the local level. If there's too much of the whole process is swept under the rug. And you talk about at the federal level all the pork barreling that goes on, but here at the local level, I think the circumstances the government has built a cocoon around itself that is just very self-motivated. And they don't give a hoot. If you go up to City Hall, that was one thing I did want to mention. I think City Hall is a very unfriendly place. People are not accommodating to the citizens. They have teaching their employees, of course. They had one last is how to be friendly but still maintain control. I've heard dozens of times when our City Hall staff has been engaged in an issue where they have been capricious, and I don't mean that we're not talking about a formation of bootlickers, but we're talking about lack of balance. But I think there are processes of land development that where the slowdown is actually part of the policy. Take your time. We don't have to be responsible for making a decision now.
You mean in issuing permits?
Delays.
Yeah, delays. And absolutely no responsibility. I've called at least 25 times to the city manager to appeal a slow process. And almost always, every time I call, bango, they're able to give a permit. Now, why would they have to wait till somebody calls to issue a permit? I think that, on the contrary, I think our police department has an excellent recommendation. I don't think the fire department is very oriented towards serving the public. It's self and tune with itself. I think the police department, on the other hand, is getting all kinds of good press, has done very well. I don't know what the answer for that is or why it's so. And I think throughout the whole department, there are at least 20 or 25 different times in my office where I've seen the city do things for itself that would never allow the public to do in land development. Well, a good example is 116th Northeast, just next to McDonald's hamburgers. There's on the west side of the freeway, there's a street being built, which is a bypass. It was a terrific, desperately needed street to be widened and made safe, because it was hard to see up over the hill. And the city did some things in that valley along the creek without an environmental impact that totally freaked me out. I couldn't understand why they did it. And they admitted finally that they did it because it was an expedient. It wasn't because they would never been able to do what they did if they observed the same laws that they required the citizens to do.
the construction of the city shops up here on 8th North.
They built one building on the west side because they owned the property there. It was where they used to keep their concrete pipe in the weeds. They really didn't need that building there. They're not using it for anything to do with repair. All it is a big office with shower rooms and everything. They could just as well build it across the street. I think it's self-serving. There's no checks and balances. There's nobody that is saying, hey, what are you guys doing? And particularly, I think with the media response has been desperately poor.
Well, one of the newspapers you did not mention earlier is Kirkland Courier.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that fit into the constellation of
Very professional paper, but they don't have it distributed. I don't know whether you get it at your house.
Mm-mm.
No, you don't. We get 3. That just because I was on the council and I complained. My son lives right up near the freeway, hasn't ever had a copy on his driveway, and I've asked him, why not? Well, what the problem is, they wanted to make the subscription an economic part of the paper. They probably only have, last I heard, somewhere around 400 or so subscriptions. So they're using a delivery service in certain parts of the city, but not all. For a while they were delivering most of the papers out to Total Money. As an advertiser, I get into the intricacies of this, which is why I found out about the Journal American. Only 1 out of 6 homes. You wouldn't advertise in a home in a paper like that, and so what it boils to is because of the Courier, and I think the Courier is a crisp paper. I think it's pretty good weekly. We get the Whidbey News from Whidbey Island every week, the same day. Whidbey is a weekly up there, and they're just been doing very well. They've got 2 sections, sometimes 3 sections. I think it has a combination because they are doing Redmond at the same time. They don't have enough time to get out and find out what's going on in the town. And
well, it's sort of a shopper. It's not really an investigative newspaper.
no, and it's really not.
Could be.
It's not really a shopper because they can't get the big chains to participate. I think they have Safeway. They need 2 or 3 major weekly advertisers, and they've tried to get me to do it. And I don't have that kind of money to do weekly ads or even every other week. But so it has a bearing in how they become involved in the community. If you noticed that, and I'm just saying that Bob's Style weekly letter to the editor just infuriated the city council because he was quite critical of some of the city's programs. He could get published every week at the Courier, only once in a while at the Journal, and so he directed all of his letters to the Courier.
What have you thought of the political coverage of East Side Week of Kirkland? There's been quite a bit of it.
Sporadic is the word. Shock value, maybe. I think sometimes they wrote just to I don't know, in investigative reporting. Well, the old days of Lori Varoche and Monty Embisk, they would go around and collect opinions, and they almost all got published. Opinions of various people. Now, when the quota came around and they cut back, they put a young and experienced lady in, and who doesn't collect opinions. She'd maybe go to Doris and the mayor, and but not even the city manager sometimes. At least if she did, she didn't publish those. Or let's say the Journal American didn't want to put the space together to do a total job. And of course the Times only hits 1 out of 20, they never come to meetings, but they probably only get a very little amount of news from their East Side Bureau. And they have quite a large bureau. I don't know what they do with their time. They don't do it in Kirkland. So the result is that I think the local coverage, media-wise, is much less, like say compared to Whidbey Island, where Vicky Lash is lashed every week for something, and or wins or whatever issue they're on, pretty well covered. And there's only about last I heard about 6,000 homes in that area versus 22,000 homes here, and they're getting, of course, because of it's a subscription paper.
Well, let me ask you, in conclusion. Okay, well, we're just coming up on the end here. Now this is the Kirkland Local History Project. This tape will exist hopefully for hundreds of years. Is there anything that you think is important to say that we have not said about your experience?
Yes, I don't have a real big stone in case the people 300 years from now don't understand how we talk in Kirkland. All I'm saying is that government is capricious in America today for the thinker. It's getting to be so frustrating that a lot of the good thinkers are freaking out and thinking of other things and turned off completely. And I have reason to believe that what I just saw in the last 8 years here is repeated many times in other places. So it's not unusual. It's a pain to see it happen. The haves and the have-nots, the people in power versus the people who are not in power. But I think, I have to give a great deal of credibility to a very professional staff, people who really know how to build a sewer line or how to run a jail or a police department and response time for the fire department. They know all these things intimately. And I don't think of it as being dishonesty in any sense of the word. I think that they're doing their job very professionally and that there's nobody giving them a policy except from their own their own feelings or where they're getting their direction. And they go to a public body like a council that I just spent time with trying to get endorsement. And I don't think that's the right way to run a railroad. People got left in the cold in the process. And
so in your experience, the council was just validating staff decisions?
That's right. Pretty much. Now, there's some exceptions. They came to us once last year and wanted to spend $2.5 million for a computer system. And if you want to see a great exercise, nobody, including I, knew whether they needed it or not. They just wanted it. So we voted it down. And that really caused consternation, because I think that I suspect that the computer system the city has is less than desirable. But they were not able to show why they needed it or what they're going to do with the money once they got it. And so we voted down, which was very unusual. It's sort of indignation. Well, if they can't tell us what they want to do with it, then we won't give it to them. And I think maybe that needs to be done a little bit more at several occasions. And I think that's what's been the fun, is that I think I've called it. I'm very satisfied that I have called it properly, if not certainly articulate properly.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay?